really appreciate the fact that you were willing to stand up.
I work for a hospital. So
Bye.
Good luck.
We have a tremendous question that has come in on different versions of the Bible. Number one, the Bible comes from the word biblia, which means many books. So we have 66 books. And in those 66 books, you should have 1,189 chapters, 31,102 verses in the King James Version. Now, there are many hundreds of different biblical versions. The King James Version is the closest to the original. 1611, under the kingship of King George. King George. I'm thinking about something different. King James, 1611 version. Now, the King James Version is where you should commit to memory scriptures from. This is where you should memorize from. This should be your basis of true biblical teaching and doctrines. I want to show you a few instances as to why. Let's take, for instance, Romans, the 13th chapter. Now, the Bible is not culturally relative, nor is it reserved for one nation. It's not an American book. It's not a Republican book or a Democratic book or a socialist or a communist book or a monarchical rule book. What is the Bible? It transcends time, it transcends cultures, all of this. Now let's just start in Romans the 13th chapter and read the first verse. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Now when you read that, this is the epistle of St. Paul to the church at Rome, hence the word Romans. Romans through Jude are the epistles. They are letters written by a pastor to those churches. Romans, Corinth, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians to the church at Galatia, on and on and on. Now, when I read the first chapter and verse number 7, we're going to tell you who this is written to. To all that be in Rome, beloved of God, called to be saints. Now we're writing to the saints of the Most High God. So we're going to deal with Romans chapter 13 the way that Paul intended it to be written and preached and spoken. To the saints of the Most High God, be subject, let every one of you saints be subject to the higher powers, apostolic authority, pastor, teacher, apostle, prophet, evangelist, fivefold ministry. The head of the church is Jesus Christ, Colossians 1:16. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist, and he is the head of the body, which is the church. Now, different version. I can preach Romans 13, and any preacher can preach it on any continent in America. You can preach it in communist China. You can preach it in Sharia law, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Jordan, Kuwait. You can preach that anywhere. But if I were to take this version called the book, let me preach this to communist Chinese. Let me preach this to people that are under Sharia law. Obey the government, for God is the one who put them there. There is no government anywhere that God has not placed in power. So those who refuse to obey the laws of the land are refusing to obey God, and punishment will follow. Preach that to communist China, where they're having their heads chopped off for professing Jesus Christ. Are you telling me that people in communist China and people in Pakistan and people in different parts of the world where they lose their hands at the wrists for having a Bible. They get their tongue cut out for witnessing about Jesus. You mean to tell me that they need to obey their governor and their policeman? In the words of one of our 1980s heroes, Mr. T, don't be a fool. Stay in school. That's ignorant. That's ignorant. Look at this one. That's the book. That's a terrible version. A terrible version. Oh, Lord. Here's one. This is another terrible version. What are we going to call this version? The New Living Translation. Romans 13:1. Obey the government, for God is the one who put it there. All governments have been placed in power by God. So those who refuse to obey the laws of the land are refusing to obey God. Well, I'm glad Amram and Jochebed refused to obey the laws of the land. They didn't murder Moses. In fact, the law of the land, Pharaoh said murder every baby boy. You see, I've got a problem with people telling me that I'm a lawbreaker according to Romans 13 because I keep my church open. You know what my problem with that is? I learned how to read 40 years ago. And I can read plain words. Let's move on to another one. Verse number 4. The authorities are sent by God to help you. Adolf Hitler was a civil governing power who had his regime, the Schutzstaffen, the SS, who went out and to save bullets lined up 5 Jews back to back and pulled the trigger to kill 5 at a time. You mean to tell me that he was sent to help me? He raped women. He murdered people by the millions in gas chambers with Zyklon B. He was sent to help me. The Baghdad butcher, Saddam Hussein, who murdered, beheaded, burned alive people who professed Christianity. You mean to tell me he was sent by God to help me? If that's the case, God and I have got a lot to talk about. But you see, that is wrong. These are not good versions. Not only are they not good, they're diabolical. These are written by socialists who want a socialist takeover and written by ideologues who hate freedom, who hate people like you and I that stand up and dare to say no. Look at this version. Ooh, the New American Standard. The New American. That's scary. Let every person be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. And those which exist are established by God. So those which exist are established by God. Robert Mugabe in Africa. Zimbabwe. Murdered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Starved them to death. You mean to tell me that Robert Mugabe was sent by God? Murdered them. He wasn't sent by God. He was sent by the devil. He's demonic. Bashar al-Assad. The Muslim Islamic rule, ISIS. The Taliban. Those are not people sent by God. They're sent by the devil. So you better be careful. Amplified. Ooh, this one's going to hurt you. Let every person be loyal. Let every person be loyally subject to the governing, parenthetically, civil authorities. Lord help. Civil authorities? So you see, I can't preach from the Amplified Version if I were to go to China. I can't preach from the New Living Translation. I can't preach from the book. But wherever I go, I can preach from the King James Version. Well, because it was written during a time, Romans 13, when Nero, the Roman emperor, the governing authority, who was not sent by God, the man was a sodomite. The man made a eunuch of his 12-year-old boy and sodomized him every day of his life. Burned Christians alive. He wasn't sent by God. Lord help. So I hope this helped you today on biblical versions. There has to be at least 8,000 scriptural differences to create a new version. Everything is translated from the King James Version. Every version comes from the KJV. In order to have a different version, if I were to create a Tony Spell version, I would have to make at least 8,000 differences. These different versions, some have 17,000 differences. Some even more. Scriptural deletions completely not there. All right, send your questions in. Hope this helps you. We'll see you down the road. God bless you in Jesus' name.